So earlier this week, I made a video where I used blueprints as a sort of jumping off point to speak more generally about game design and how you can sort of design around random elements in your game to try and reduce frustrations and whatnot. Link in the doobly-doo if you want to check that out for yourself. But I want to make another video that's a little bit less scripted and a little bit more focused on more of why exactly I have the opinions I do on blueprints. You know, what I like about the game, what I don't like about the game, as well as not really having to avoid talking about spoilers. So in that case, this is your spoiler warning. I am just going to be talking about pretty much whatever I feel like talking about today. So, to start off with, there's actually a really well-written comment on my last video by one, My Clamish, who basically went into more in depth about the information aspect of game design that I was talking about in that video, and kind of broke things down into more specific categories by labeling things as effectively pre-information games and post-information games, with the distinction being that there are some games where the core game design is about telling the player basically all the information that they could possibly work with before they make any decisions of their own, and then there are other games where you're only given some information, and then when you make your decisions, only after you lock everything in do you then get informed of what the consequences of your choices actually are. And like, I do feel like I kind of alluded to these concepts a little bit in my video, but I do think it's a good idea to sort of make this a more explicit thing to be aware of, because I do think that it is the core reason why certain games feel the way that they do. The examples they brought up, which I also talked about in my previous video, are XCOM and Into the Breach. Because in a game like XCOM, you know, you're very specifically not given a ton of information beyond just what enemies there are and where they are when it's time to make your turn. So what makes XCOM feel like XCOM is the fact that you're forced to take risks and weigh your options, and then you're only able to see how your choices play out after you've already locked things in. You know, that's what makes XCOM feel so dangerous. And if you were to change that, then it wouldn't really feel like XCOM anymore. And conversely, Into the Breach uses the opposite style, where every single thing that every enemy is going to do is displayed to the player before they make their turn, and even updates in real time as you do things like move the enemies around or put obstacles in the path of the enemy attacks and things like that. And the thing is that I think that this distinction is what makes XCOM feel like a strategy game, and is what makes Into the Breach feel like a puzzle game. Because even though they are both technically tactics games, where you're, you know, playing turn-based, grid-based combat to try and defeat as many aliens as possible, because of how Into the Breach displays its information and tries to give the player as much information as possible to work off of, you're effectively just solving randomly generated puzzles with every single turn, where the solution is to try and minimize civilian casualties and maximize the amount of aliens you kill, with a few exceptions depending on the mission type. And so the point that they were making in their comment is that if you were to change blueprints to, you know, give the player more information and do things like what one thing I recommended as a possible solution to the frustrations is to allow the player to back out of drafting a room so that they could then go to another door and see what their options are, so that in theory you could know, like, okay, this door has these three options and this door has these three options. Now I can make a more informed choice as to which door to go down. And like, that could dramatically change the way that Blueprints feels to play. And I agree with what they're saying there, but the point that I disagree with is the fact that at the end of the day, Blueprints is primarily trying to be a puzzle game. So I feel like mimicking more of that Into the Breach style design would make it more of a puzzle game and make it feel like I'm actually solving the layout of the house like its own puzzle more than just trying to react to whatever rooms I happen to get. And I think that that's why I'm much more in favor of this kind of choice for a possible change to the game than some other people might be, because like at the end of the day, the thing I like about Blueprints the most is the puzzle solving. And like that's the other thing, is that at the end of the day, I like the drafting mechanic conceptually. I think it is a novel way to structure a game like this, because it randomizes the order that you'll encounter certain things. It makes it so that every playthrough feels unique. The way I approach the game is going to be different from how my friend approaches the game, both because we're different people, but also because we'll be encountering different rooms in a different order throughout our playthrough. And I do think that in general, I do think it's a good system, like it's a good idea for a system in the game, but the problem is that it feels like it can get in the way of the puzzles, which feel like a much more structured and core element of the game. Like, yeah, the drafting is what you end up doing most of the time, but you're doing the drafting in order to try and get information as well as access like new puzzles at the end of the day. Like it is the drafting is just a means to an end in the grand scope of the game. And so what I think ends up happening for a lot of players, including myself, is that like for the first few hours, the drafting is pretty novel because every single room you encounter is new and unique and you've never seen it before. So there's so much information that you can possibly learn from every single run. And especially as time goes on, because I remember there's like this interesting sort of bell curve effect where when I first started the game, I was like, okay, I wonder where the puzzles are going to be. And I was just wandering around. Hell, I streamed my first few hours with it. And, when I first was playing it, I wasn't really finding too many puzzles except for the much more explicit ones, like the ones in the billiard room and the parlor room. But as time goes on, you start realizing, oh wait, that's actually been a puzzle the whole time, like the paintings puzzle, or I guess they're more sketches, and like that puzzle is literally prevalent throughout every single room in the house. And then you have like there's all kinds of like hidden little puzzles like that, and so as you discover more and more puzzles, I think the drafting mechanic becomes more and more tolerable because there's always something to do and aim for whenever you're drafting. So even though you don't really have that much control over the drafting mechanic as a whole, it doesn't really matter that much because there's so many different directions you can go at the same time. But then as time goes on and you start solving more and more of the puzzles, like because there are people I've talked to about this who are like, well, yeah, but there's always a puzzle in like every room for you to solve. But and like I feel like a lot of them are just talking about the sketches puzzle, since that is literally in every room. Um, but the problem is that once you solve the sketches puzzle, and once you solve most of the basic puzzles that are all like self-contained in each room, you end up getting into this situation where there's a lot of rooms that now have basically nothing new to offer the player. So as a result, most of the rooms end up becoming just their pure utilitarian functionality to you as a player, rather than anything to actually like meaningfully explore anymore. Like if you encounter like the den, like as far as you know, unless there's a puzzle in there that you haven't solved, it's just a T-shaped hallway that has a gem in it. There's a lot of rooms that effectively just are like you only start thinking of them in terms of the resources they'll give you, like if a bedroom gives you extra steps and things like that, or if it is just the number of doors it has, because you want to try and like maximize the number of doors so that you don't get dead ended. And like once you reach that point where you're just kind of flying through rooms trying to find something new, that's when I think the drafting mechanic starts feeling like it's getting in the way, because what inevitably ends up happening is you end up getting into a situation like with the laboratory. Like the laboratory is a great example, I think, because the laboratory has a pretty much self-contained puzzle that is almost entirely within itself, like the periodic table thing, basically, where you just gotta match up like letters and stuff. And once you solve that puzzle, there's not really much else to solve because the input for that puzzle is in the same room. You just need to input the solution. The problem arises with the fact that you can only input the solution if the room is powered. And you can only power the room if you also draft the, what is it called? The boiler room, which is effectively the power plant. And then you have to either connect it directly to the laboratory, or you have to connect it to other rooms that have power conduits that are then connected to the laboratory. And like that's the thing, is that okay, so you could think of this as a larger meta puzzle where, like, okay, I solved the laboratory part of the puzzle, but now I need to find the boiler room, solve that puzzle, and then I need to solve the puzzle of connecting the two. Okay, that's so far so good. So you eventually find the boiler room, you wander around, you solve that puzzle so that you can power it on, but then you get to the puzzle of actually connecting the two rooms together. And unlike the puzzles within the rooms, where you're given all of the information and tools that you need in order to solve those puzzles, you're not really given a ton of ways to directly manipulate the RNG that let you actually connect these rooms together. Like, it, there are tools that do explicitly like help you solve this puzzle, but like for example, I distinctly remember the way that I managed to get the rooms to connect was this very convoluted series of events that like technically let me manipulate the RNG, but it was done in such a way that it doesn't feel like I actually did anything, if that makes sense. Like let me walk you through it. I was doing a run, and I was doing this thing where I encountered the workshop just by happenstance. I encountered the workshop relatively early on in my run, and the workshop is a room that lets you combine items together. And so I don't know what items you can combine in this game, so I was just trying random stuff to see what would happen. And so I realized, oh, I could combine this item, which again, I just kind of happened to have. I didn't like try to have any of these items on my person when I went into the workshop. I just happened to have them, and they let me craft some kind of. It was like an electromagnet or something, and once I had the electromagnet, that apparently makes it much more likely for mechanical rooms with power conduits to spawn. And then once I had that, then thankfully I hadn't already spawned the laboratory yet, so I was able to spawn the boiler room came up first, and then I was able to resolve that puzzle, power up the boiler room. Then from the boiler room, because of the electromagnet helping me out, basically every room I drafted had a power conduit, and it still took me like going through like a dozen different rooms before I finally got the laboratory to spawn. So it could have easily gone wrong at any point during this journey. But then when I finally got the laboratory to spawn, then all I had to do was input the solution. But like that whole process, like I didn't control what items I had when I got into the workshop. I didn't control the spawning of the workshop itself. I didn't control the fact that the items just so happened to turn into an item that dramatically increased my odds of getting the rooms I wanted. And then I just kind of was drafting randomly until I finally just so happened to connect the boiler room and the laboratory. Like, at no point during that process do I feel like I was the one solving the puzzle there. It just feels like I was playing the slots and just so happened to get triple sevens and got turbo lucky for one particular run. And like, that doesn't feel like good puzzle design to me. And like, to talk more generally about puzzle design while we're on the topic, there's this one thing about designing puzzles that I'm pretty sure Game Maker's Toolkit talked about it like a few years ago. But I feel like a cardinal sin in puzzle design is the idea that a player might be presented with a puzzle and have all of the information necessary to solve it, and might know the solution. But then the problem becomes actually inputting the solution might take going through like 40 steps or this long convoluted process or something like that. Like if a puzzle solution was to effectively input the first 100 digits of the Fibonacci sequence, that would be a bad puzzle because once you know what the rules for the Fibonacci sequence are, it's really easy to figure out what the next digit is, pretty much no problem. But then actually inputting 100 digits just for a single puzzle solution is just a pointless waste of time. There's nothing that's really testing the player at that point beyond their patience, if that makes sense. And this is, I think, the problem with a lot of Blueprints' puzzles. Like, the laboratory is one example. Another one that is pretty good is the tomb, which is one of the outdoor rooms that you can get. So the tomb is an interesting room where there's a lot. It's a really big room for one, and there's a lot going on that I was like oh, there's clearly a puzzle here, but I technically had the knowledge to solve it, but I wasn't able to put two and two together just yet when I first got the tomb, and that's fine. I just that's on me for not being able to figure out how to solve it. But then later on, after I moved on, and it was a couple runs later, I got to the chapel and realized, oh, I know what the solution to the tomb puzzle is now. Like, I just knew the solution because I found the right information and I was able to put the pieces together in my head and go, okay, I know exactly what I need to do to solve the tomb puzzle. But then the problem is that you only get one chance with every single run to spawn the tomb in the outdoor house or in the outdoor like shed thing. So now every single run from that point onwards just became me rushing to the outdoor house, seeing if there was seeing if I got the tomb that day, and then if I didn't, I was forced to just continue with my run, and then hope that I got the tomb on the next one. And it took me like, I want to say like 3 hours before I finally got the tomb to spawn. And so that meant that I was just sitting on this puzzle solution that could have given me a lot of really cool new information when I solved it. Because like there's a ton of stuff that you learn by solving the tomb puzzle. But because I wasn't able to solve it for multiple hours despite knowing the solution, like that just leads to more frustration. And like that's what it feels like for a lot of the puzzle. Like any kind of multi-room puzzle that is like not self-contained in a single room feels like this. Like the music sheet puzzle, the chess puzzle, like a lot of the laboratory puzzle with the power and everything, all of these puzzles that require the interaction between multiple rooms, or things like you to have the shovel in order to dig something up or anything like that, the drafting mechanic feels like it gets in the way of solving those puzzles, because when I'm drafting rooms, it doesn't feel like I'm actually solving anything. It just feels like I'm hoping to get the rooms I want. Because like that's the thing, like you could maybe argue that the laboratory puzzle is at least like somewhat of a puzzle to get the rooms to connect, because you have to connect all these different rooms together. But a lot of the other puzzles, like the tomb and the music sheets and whatnot, those don't actually require the rooms to directly interact with each other. It's literally just a matter of getting the rooms to spawn so that you can get the information you need out of them. And like at that point, it just feels like I'm playing roulette, hoping to get the rooms I want so that I can make any meaningful progress. And actually, another aspect that kind of just occurred to me is that, so like, for example, with that tomb puzzle that I was talking about, and it took me, several hours just to be able to input the solution, a much worst case scenario is the idea that the player could be wrong. Like, this is why it's a bad idea to make inputting the solution take so long in a puzzle game, because that is how you test your theories and hypotheses and whatnot. Say I was in that scenario with the tomb puzzle, right? And, I give up, I explore the mansion for a little while, and then I go, oh, wait a minute. I think I have the solution. And then, just like I said with my example, it takes me several hours to get the tomb to spawn again so that I can try it out. And then, imagine if it turned out that my theory was wrong. Now, not only did it take me forever just to be able to input the solution once, but now it feels like all of that time was completely wasted because it turned out that I just happened to be wrong. Like I understand not wanting to make it so that you could just guess the solution to every puzzle, but like making it so that you only get a chance to input the solution once, and then you have to wait for potentially more RNG and multiple other runs to go through before you could even get another try at it, is that's such a problematic design choice. Like it makes it so that whenever I find a room with a puzzle that I haven't solved, I no longer want to make any progress anywhere else because the game is effectively incentivizing me to tackle every puzzle one room at a time and make sure that I solve it. Because if I don't solve a puzzle the first time I encounter it, I don't know the next time I'll see it again. It might show up on my next run, it might show up 10 runs from now. And I feel like that runs contrary to how I've seen some of the defenders of this game kind of talk about it. Because, like, I see people going like, okay, look, yeah, the RNG can be frustrating, but that just means you need to focus on multiple different goals at the same time. Go in multiple different directions, try working on multiple puzzles simultaneously. And I understand the reasoning there because that makes it so that, you're more, you got to stick and move, play with what the game gives you, and then, work that way. But because of how these puzzles end up playing out in practice, especially if you get stuck or just end up getting a wrong solution to a puzzle, that means that now you're directly incentivized to not go around and try other things in the meantime. It means you want to stick to one puzzle and try to solve it as hard as possible, and then you don't want to make any other progress until it is done, so that you don't have to worry about finding it again or anything like that. Like, you only want to leave a room if you're 100% certain that either the puzzle is solved or that the puzzle cannot be solved. And again, you could even be wrong in either of those two assumptions, and then if you leave the room and then it turns out, oh no, there was actually something else I could do in that room, well then now, again, the frustration just comes back because now you gotta find the room again. And it doesn't feel like there's enough tools in the game to be able to actually access the rooms you want to access. Like, that is literally the point of the drafting system, is that you can't access those rooms over again. But like, when so many of the puzzles also give you permanent upgrades that make the game easier, that also feels like it just breeds more frustration. Because, like, I can imagine, because I'm pretty sure the laboratory is one of the ones that, like, unlocks a permanent upgrade, and, like, the tomb and whatnot. And so, the fact that you can be stuck on those puzzles, not because you didn't solve them, but because you literally haven't been allowed to solve them due to the RNG for, like I said, potentially multiple hours, it just... there's a reason why this game is so frustrating to so many people. Like, and that's the thing. I get the appeal. For the first few hours especially, I was loving this game. I really, really enjoyed, exploring the mansion, finding new rooms, uncovering new information, encountering new puzzles, and having to solve them. I think there's a lot of really good stuff here, and I understood the comparisons to the Outer Wilds that a ton of people were making, because this game was a very knowledge focused game where your progression can rely just as much on learning things and figuring things out as it does on gaining those permanent upgrades and whatnot. But the key difference is that in Outer Wilds, if I realize the solution to a puzzle, either because I find it somewhere in the world or because, I just came to the solution by thinking about it really hard, I could just hop in my spaceship, fly to the right planet, and try the solution in the span of like a couple of minutes tops. And like that makes Outer Wilds feel a lot less frustrating to me. Because like yeah, there is like a time limit aspect. I'm gonna try and not. If there's one game I'm not going to spoiler, it's gonna be Outer Wilds. Um, but like some people get frustrated by the timing element of the game, and I can understand that. But like you're never really locked out of anything. Like if you're running out of time, you could just start a new run and then go straight back to where you were. And if in that game, if a location is hard to access and like you need to go through like a whole rigmarole in order to get back to where you were, that usually means that there's another puzzle that you can solve that would make that process go away. Like there is an explicit solution to any of the problems in that game that involve like traversal and getting to certain locations. Like if you're trying to get to the Sunless City and you don't want to go through the cave tunnel again, there is a way around it if you can find the solution to that, sort of mini puzzle. And then you don't have to go to the caves ever again, and you can just get straight back to the city, minute one of a new run. Whereas in Blue Prince, there are ways. Like I definitely, because like I remember when I got to the apple orchard, there's like a hint telling you about how like green rooms tend to spawn on the exterior of the house, on the west and east, side, and obviously certain rooms only prefer to like the west hall is only going to spawn on the west side of the house, and there's various hints like that at least give you something to go off of, so that you can get an idea of what you need to do. But it still feels like, whenever I start a new run, I don't feel like I have enough control to really make too many meaningful choices. And like maybe there is more information that I could be learning. Maybe there's more tools that I could be unlocking as permanent upgrades that would make the game easier and would allow me to mitigate the RNG. I know there are some super like RNG manipulators you unlock later on, like I believe the observatory, when you get to 50 stars, apparently it lets you use stars effectively as dice to reroll rooms, and like that's a huge deal. And I totally get that as a quote unquote solution to the RNG, but like I played the game for like what 20 hours, and I'm on day 30 or so, and getting to day 50, and keeping in mind you have to get to the observatory, which might not always spawn every day. So you have to get to the observatory 50 times, which will likely take far more than 50 days in order to unlock that. And it's like, am I really going to play this game? Like, even knowing that that is a thing that exists that will make the game a lot easier, it's still, I'm at the situation where it's like, do I really want to play this game for potentially like 10, 20 more hours just to grind out runs so that I can finally get the observatory maxed out, get those 50 stars, and then finally just get the ability to re-roll rooms more often, which still isn't like the best upgrade. Like, don't get me wrong, it is a huge upgrade. I would love to have 50 free re-rolls, but even that huge upgrade is like, it makes it so that because your stars persist between runs, so you won't be able to use them forever. Like once you run out of stars, you lose the upgrade, and that kind of feels like it defeats the purpose a little bit. Like unless you somehow bank like hundreds of stars through like the laboratory or something, like that kind of sucks. That you like it's not even a permanent upgrade, and even then, when you reroll a room, you're not guaranteed that the next rooms you're gonna get are any good. It's still better than nothing, don't get me wrong, but yeah, and like I know there are other ones because like the wrench lets you adjust the rarity of certain rooms. But like I talked about this in my last video, but like, you can't control when you get the wrench, and you can't control what rooms you find with the wrench, so you're just kind of hoping for the best. I think there's another room called like the conservatory, which similarly lets you manipulate like the rarity of certain rooms. But again, you have to unlock the conservatory, which a new player is not going to even know exists, let alone how to unlock it. And then, even then, once you do unlock it, you then have to get the room to spawn in the first place. And then, once the room has finally spawned, you then have to hope that you get the rooms you want in order to manipulate them. Like, every single method of manipulating the RNG just feels like more RNG to me. And it feels like the frustration of the game and like how annoying it is can just come down to which of these tools you just happen to get lucky and get access to early on. Like, I'm seriously curious if most of the people like me who have like a bad time with this game because they get too frustrated by the RNG after a while. I wonder if we're just the ones who are getting unlucky and not getting access to many of these tools for a really long time, and that is what is causing us to feel like the RNG is unfair. Because like maybe everyone else is just getting these tools to spawn way more often or something. And meanwhile, I'm over here and I feel like I'm at the point where I feel like I've solved most of the most common rooms in the entire mansion that I've like come across. And like, yeah, there's definitely more rooms that exist, and it feels like there's plenty of puzzles that I haven't solved yet. Like I'm still working on the chess puzzle, for example. But like, I think I know what the solution to the chess puzzle is, but I can't test that solution until I get a million different things to line up in just the right way, just to be able to test the solution. And even then, I might still run out of steps before I can even input the solution. So it's, oh my god, yeah. I really want to like this game. I really do. I think Blueprints is a really interesting game. And I think that uncovering the game's story, because like the game doesn't really give you a lot to go off of early on. That's another way that it's like Outer Wilds. Like, you start the game with an extremely simple premise, and it's kind of up to you to even discover that the game has a story, and that there's all this like background lore for you to like read about in like little newspaper clippings and all this stuff. So like that's like really interesting, and I really enjoy uncovering that story and finding new puzzles for me to solve, and like the realization that something that I've been interacting with for like the entire game is actually like part of a puzzle, like the drawings. Because like I started solving, I realized what the gimmick with the drawings was very early, because the conservatory, or not the conservatory, the shop room. I can't remember what it's called. But the shop room kind of spells out the premise of the drawing puzzles, right? And so I realized, like, oh, you have to use them to like get letters and whatnot, and then realizing, oh, wait a minute, every single room has exactly two pictures. I can start putting, like, that's what the order of the letters is. And so, going through and like trying to find all the drawings in every room and figuring out, how to arrange them and everything, like that was all like really fun. But like once like, there's only so many puzzles that are like that in the game. And I feel like people like, and again, maybe I don't know because I haven't played long enough, but I feel like when people are talking about how there's like puzzles in every room, you can still solve most of those puzzles, and then once you do, those puzzles are effectively gone. Like, there's not really much point to doing anything in those rooms anymore. And so once you reach that point, the game, I feel, loses a lot of its charm because there's just less things to discover. And that's why, like, again, going back to Outer Wilds, like, you can discover everything there is to find on a planet in Outer Wilds. And then once you're done with that planet, you just don't have to go back to that planet anymore. And so it makes your exploration that much more efficient because you know, okay, I've basically discovered everything there is to discover here. I don't need to worry about going back there unless I want to like reference something again, right? Um and like and also that's the other thing is Outer Wilds has a journal system where you can where it records like everything in the game in a journal, and Blueprints very specifically does not. And I both agree and disagree with this choice, I think. I feel like Steam is kind of doing a lot of heavy lifting for this game because Blueprints, it's a game that wants you to take notes, and I respect that. I like the fact that the game is like, it's up to you to keep track of notes and whatnot. But I also feel like there are certain gotchas in the game where the game just kind of punishes you for not just like taking screenshots of literally everything. Because like that's like what the tomb puzzle was, right? Like I didn't realize that the windows in the chapel actually meant anything until I found the tomb. So because I hadn't like taken a screenshot of those like windows or anything, there was no way for me to reference them. You know, the music sheets is another one where you're gathering the music sheets and you realize, okay, I know what the puzzle is. I'm going to solve it. And then when you solve the puzzle, you go, oh, I need the full music sheets so I can solve a different puzzle that I didn't know was there the whole time. And like that's like fine in theory, but again, it ties back into what I was talking about with how annoying it is to not be able to get to the rooms you want to get to because you know you're writing down the key pieces of information that you think are important only to realize that oh no, there's actually a different piece of information that I needed to be paying attention to. And so that what that ends up doing is that it puts you into this awkward situation where you're just taking screenshots of literally everything in the game because you don't know what will end up becoming important later. And so like it like yeah, it's this awkward thing where you have to keep track, like you have to have like hundreds of screenshots on hand, like and sure, you don't need every single thing to be screenshotted, but you never know what will be important, so you end up having to screenshot everything. And it ends up, you know, like before you realize that there's so much information that you can miss, and so having to get back to the rooms to find that information, it's so ah, like it makes you wish that there was like some kind of, at the very least, I personally believe that if a game is going to want the player to take notes, I believe the game should supply an in-game journal. Even if literally all it is just effectively an in-game notepad document, I still think that games that are like note-taking games should give a way for the player to take notes in-game. And if not, to also include like a screenshot system. It does feel like there should be, at the very least for like documents and stuff, there should be a way to like catalog, like, oh, I've picked up this music sheet and I've read through like this journal. So being able to like keep all of those, because like in theory you can just screenshot all of that stuff. And yeah, like not everything you want to screenshot is necessarily like a journal or a document or anything. But at the very least, having a catalog of all of the journals and documents you've found up to that point, I feel is again like another quality of life feature that should be included in the game. Because again, it just punishes the player for not writing down literally everything. And I feel like that's not a good idea because it's just annoying when it happens. Like when like oh, like I was reading through in the archives, there's a bunch of newspaper clippings. Um and I realized like, oh wait, maybe the dates on the newspaper clippings are important, and so I had to then again go through a bunch of different rooms until and do a ton of different runs until I finally got the archives to spawn again, so that I could finally, which is also annoying because the archives are a red room that messes up the rest of your run. But once I got the archives, I then was able to write down all that information, and I don't even know if any of that information is actually important. Those dates might not actually be relevant to the puzzle that I think they're relevant to. But, the fact that I had to go through, like I said, all of this rigmarole just to be able to get a piece of information that might not even be important. That is why I feel like the drafting system ends up taking away from the game more than it adds. Like, at the very least, I feel like the drafting system needs more ways to control it. Like, you need the fact that there aren't, or at least as far as I can tell, there isn't a permanent dice upgrade that like lets you start with like 2 dice at the start of every run, or an upgrade that just lets you like manipulate and say like, oh, this room like will not spawn for like the next whatever, like, or something like that, that is consistent. Like, there needs to be some consistency to help offset the insane amount of randomness in this game that I just feel is lacking. And I don't feel like there's enough strategy in the drafting system to really make the game worth its inclusion. And like, the breaking point for me and where I stopped playing was when I got to room 46 for the first time. Um I was shocked that there wasn't any kind of like tangible reward to make the drafting easier, because like, at the very least you could argue that the main goal of the game, getting to room 46, at least the initial goal, that is like what the drafting mechanic is there for, because that is what makes it, non-trivial to get to room 46. You have to, play into the drafting mechanic and be careful about how you arrange your rooms and everything, and do everything in your power in order to try and get to the other side of the house and unlock that room. Um, but once you've done that, and you get the revelation that, oh, there's actually all this other stuff that you can use in order to get to it. There's like, because there's so much content that is like quote unquote post game. I've seen so many people talking about how getting to room 46 is like the end of the tutorial, quote unquote. Very Monster Hunter kind of jab, right? But what, like, once you've gotten to room 46, it's kind of insane that they don't give you some kind of like super RNG manipulator, maybe not an infinite dice reroll, sure, but something to like, much more freely change the rarity of certain rooms, and much more, willfully strategize. Like, at the very least, unlocking the ability to like back away from a door and try a different one without having to commit to drafting it yet, or unlocking like a fourth drafting slot, or like some major fundamental change that makes the drafting easier. Like that would be a great like mechanical reward for reaching room 46 that would make me want to actually engage with the post game. But the fact that like beating room 46 gave me seemingly nothing, and I was just dumped back into the game and given a trophy and amusingly a gift shop, which is hilarious, I'll admit. Um, but yeah, the fact that you get nothing and you're just kind of expected to keep dealing with the annoying RNG, except now you're not even trying to like get to room 46 anymore because you have so many other random objectives to take care of, which means that like you're much more focused on trying to get to certain specific rooms more than, trying to actually like get to the other side of the house. Like, the size of the house just kind of becomes a drafting limit more than anything else at that point. So like I could maybe understand keeping the system as frustrating as it is up until you get to room 46. But why does it continue to work the same way after that point? That's what I really don't understand. Like, at that point, the drafting is basically over for what it services the game, in my opinion. It feels like it should be over at the very least. And yeah, I just there needs, they really need, I think, more, like, I don't know. it maybe I'm just, the one that's complaining and annoyed by this, and everybody else is fine. But I know there's more people like me, and it doesn't feel like it's our fault for getting frustrated at the game because of all the RNG. Like, if I get annoyed at the game because of, bad luck, and it keeps happening over and over again. Because like that's the thing, I love roguelikes. It's not because I've seen some other people talking about how like, oh well, like roguelikes rely on randomness all the time. Why is this any different? You probably just don't like roguelikes. I love roguelikes. Roguelikes are probably my favorite. Like, I don't know if genre is the right word, but like they're one of my favorite types of game that exists. Like, I love the inherent replayability of a roguelike. I love the random elements that allow you to mix things up with each run. I honestly, that's the thing. The more I play Blueprints, the less it honestly feels like a roguelike. Because, like, in a roguelike, you're usually testing some specific skill and you're trying to see how far you can take that skill in a run. And the thing that stops your run is usually the testing of that skill. The RNG is just to create different scenarios for the testing of that skill. In Into the Breach, you are testing your tactical ability, and the RNG just creates different scenarios where you have to, try and kill as many bugs as possible while protecting civilians. In Hades and Into the Gungeon and other like action roguelikes like that, you are testing your action gameplay skills more than anything, and then the RNG just determines things like what enemies you're gonna face and what abilities you get for that particular run. Whereas in Blueprints, the thing you're testing is your ability to solve puzzles, but the RNG determines what puzzles you have access to on a given run. And when you get runs where the RNG decides, oh, sorry, you're only going to get rooms that you've already solved, then that doesn't feel like it's actually adding something to the roguelike nature of the game. Especially when so many puzzles are things that like persist between runs. So like it's not even really run based when you think about it, because the goal of the game is just to try and reach, certain rooms and solve puzzles. It's and the information carries over between runs. It would be like if in Hades or in Into the Gungeon, you just got to keep all of your guns after each run and then use those guns to like fight a different boss that you randomly got. Like that wouldn't really feel like a roguelike at that point. Um Whereas Blueprints, that is kind of the structure that you're going with, because as you solve more puzzles, or at the very least get more information, your ability to solve puzzles is increased, but you're only allowed to solve the puzzles that the game decides to hand to you. And so, like, the RNG isn't creating random puzzles like in Into the Breach. It's not creating different scenarios through which you have to puzzle your way out of them. It is just a delivery mechanism for the puzzles that are fixed in the game. The puzzle, like, with the exception of, I guess, the dartboard and the parlor room puzzle, and maybe there's another one that I'm forgetting. Like, those puzzles, I guess, are just random puzzles. Although I'm pretty sure they just pull from like a absurdly long list. I'm actually kind of curious how that works. Um, but those puzzles like are one thing, but like the drafting, it doesn't actually directly tie into the puzzle solving, really. Like apart from like I guess the drawing puzzle, which even then it isn't really tied to the drafting. It's just tied to the layout of the house, which is kind of two different things, right? Um, and so yeah, I, I want to like this game more than I do. Like I've said it already several times, but I really do. Um, but I just I just can't bring myself to open it again, with the exception of recording footage for these videos, ironically enough. And so after this video, I'm probably not going to touch it again. And I hate that. I want to enjoy this game. I really do. And I guess not everything has to be made, for me or people like me. Not every game has to appeal to everyone. But it feels like most of this game appeals to me, And that's like the annoying thing. Like, it would be one thing if we were talking about a game like Call of Duty or whatever, and it's like, yeah, that game doesn't appeal to me. I don't expect them to change it to make me happy because I'm not the target audience of that game. I get that. But with Blueprints, I think you're lying to yourself if you say that it's flawless. I don't see how you could look at the RNG nature of the game and say that it isn't at least somewhat problematic. I think that, and I think the fact that there are so many people that, because it's not a matter of hating the game. Almost, if you look at the Steam page and you look at the store reviews of the game that are all negative, like, I mean, all the negative ones, almost every single negative review on Steam usually starts by saying, this is a really good game. This game is brilliant. I really enjoyed this game. I would love this game. Every single negative review talks about how much they like the game. It's not just that the game didn't vibe with them. It's that they were enjoying their game a lot, but then as time goes on, they got more and more frustrating with it and ended up quitting it and giving the game a negative review. And that, I think, is a sign of a much bigger problem than the game just not being for them. I think that that's a reductive argument to make, to just say, oh, well, I guess it's just not your type of game. Because if that was true, then these people wouldn't be talking about how much they loved the game. It clearly is their type of game. It's just designed in such a way that they couldn't bring themselves to finish it. And I think that is my biggest argument for why I think that Blueprints is worth giving updates. And call it, piss baby mode if you need to. I don't care if they need to create a different mode that explicitly makes fun of people like me for wanting the RNG to be less frustrating. It would be rude of them to do that, but if they want to have a mode where the game is exactly like it was on launch with all the cruel RNG as it is untouched, and then have a different like cheat code mode for all the people like me that labels you, a crybaby or whatever, and then makes the RNG easier, I will take that because I want to experience more of this game's puzzles. I want to play around with it more. I'm half tempted. I've seen people say that if you get frustrated with the RNG, that you could just use Cheat Engine and basically just change the RNG to or like cheat yourself like a million dice at the start of each run, or make it so that certain things spawn a certain way. And like, I don't know if I want to resort to that, but I feel like unless they're willing to make changes to the game, the only chance that I have of playing this game again is if I feel like opening up Cheat Engine and then cheating like that. And I don't want to do that, but that's the only way I think I could play it again at this point. But yeah, I think I've rambled and ranted on long enough. I think you get the idea. That's my sort of argument for why again, I don't want to say I don't like this game. It's my argument for why the game feels less than the sum of its parts, is I think the best way to put it. Because I like the drafting mechanic in concept. I love the puzzles. I love the exploration. I love the mansion. I love the story. But the drafting mechanic plus all of that other stuff makes the game feel like less than it could have been otherwise. Like, that's the thing, is that I feel like if the RNG was a lot easier to manipulate, and if the game was uh like a lot less reliant on randomness to solve certain puzzles, and if it was like that from the start, I don't think you would have a single person in the entire world who would have looked at the game and gone, you know what this game needed? This game needed more RNG. This game needed to be more cruel with its randomness and make it harder for me to find the rooms I want to find. I don't think a single person would have said that. I feel like the only people that are defending the RNG and saying that it doesn't need to be changed at all are probably people who got lucky and got ways to manipulate it earlier in their run, or are just people who have a lot more free time on their hand and are able to dedicate enough time in order to just grind out the RNG. Because like that's the main thing, is that like people like me, I don't have all day to just sit around grinding runs in a game where it feels like I'm not making any meaningful progress. If I'm going to be spending 4 hours playing a video game and my choice is to either do 10 runs in blueprints where I might maybe make progress a little bit, or just play Monster Hunter for a little while, I'm gonna pick Monster Hunter every time. Like, it doesn't feel like the way the RNG is. It doesn't feel like it respects my time enough to be worth giving it my time. And if maybe if I had infinite time, then sure, I might be able to grind through it and make it through the end of the game, no problem. But I just don't have infinite time, and I feel like the game would be better if it respected my time more. But like I said, I really need to end this video. So as always, I mean, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. Feel free to let me know if you've got any more thoughts on blueprints. I know there's probably going to be a heated discussion in the comments debating whether or not the drafting in the RNG is fair or not. And by all means, feel free. I'm very curious to see what people have to say, and I want to see more of the arguments in favor of the RNG, because I just don't see it right now. And I want to know what some of the diehards who defend this game have to say to some of the things I say, and also just in general. Because like I really want, like, if there's something you can tell me that will suddenly magically make this RNG a million times more bearable, then tell me. I'm legitimately, like, at this point I don't really care about spoilers anymore, since like I said, I'm probably not going to play the game again. So feel free to let me know down in the comments. But I think that will do it for today. So thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to leave me a like. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And as always, I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.